What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel today. We're doing Flex Friday, week 2. We had an okay week last week, but let's welcome in Andy, who's going to join me for week 2. Andy, how you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Wife has COVID right now, so I am secluding myself into my little dungeon up here, just looking into every single fantasy football line, trying to find an edge, figure out who to play, who to sit. So, maybe there's some benefit to this whole thing.
Yeah, DoorDash some beers on Sunday and just lock the door. I mean, there's worse times of year to get locked into your room. If you guys haven't been to the channel before, Andy and I are going to give you some awesome flex picks for the week. These are some deeper guys that we're not assuming are being started as RB1s, RB2s in your league. And then we're going to give you some streamers as well. So Andy's going to get us kicked off with our show's favorite player of all time.
And, I should have known. Some of us should have picked him week 1, just almost for the fact of how much we love Rashid Shaheed. Went off in week 1, had a huge bomb, like 57-yard touchdown to start the game. And, that game just quickly got out of hand as the Saints just totally curb stomped the Carolina Panthers, and they did not really need to throw the rest of the game. I mean, you could start running the clock out in the second quarter against that team, it feels like. But this week, playing the Cowboys, I think it's going to be a much closer game. And Rashid should get a lot more work and quite a few more targets. With Deron Bland on injured reserve for the Cowboys too, Shaheed will be getting matchups against 5th-round rookie Kalen Carson, who did have a great week 1 when they played the Browns. But with Shaheed, it only takes one play. You only need him to beat him one time deep down the field to get you a great fantasy week. And so I'll take the super fast Rashid Shaheed versus a rookie corner who runs a 4.5. I think he gets it done at least once, maybe twice, but I think he's somebody you can definitely start this week.
Yeah, I think both Andy and I were a little we both had picked him in prop bets to score touchdowns, but then neither one of us called him for the show. But we just love this dude, man. He's so fun. He's so fast. He is just one of the best deep threats in the league. And hopefully the game script this week, like you said, they're either in a close game or they're behind. I really don't see him putting up 48 and leading by 30 points on the Cowboys. So they're going to be throwing. And Shaheed has a chance to have a big game for you. So my first player of the week, J.K. Dobbins, a guy who had an amazing week 1. He only had 10 carries, but he blew up for over 100 yards against the Raiders. What I really liked about J.K. Dobbins last week is that he actually was out-touched by Gus Edwards in the first half when the game was closer, and then they kind of pulled away once they started giving the ball to Dobbins in the second half. So I just think he's the better player there, and they slowly began to realize that. Now, as a big J.K. Dobbins fan, I am totally fine with 10 to 12 touches for this guy. I don't want them to feed him 15 to 20 touches every week. He has one of the highest yards per carry just in his career for any player, really. He just keeps getting hurt. But even though this dude doesn't have the perfect long speed, he has amazing vision, great quickness, which are much more valuable for a running back. And I just think it's going to be a good matchup against Carolina. I could see them using J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. I don't imagine they fall behind. These are perfect game scripts. Obviously, Carolina losing one of their best players on a team that really didn't even have any good players already. But Derek Brown, their defensive lineman, going on IR. So I think it's all running away against Carolina this week. And I think you should be stoked to play J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, this was a great team to run the ball against with Derek Brown, and now without him, oh man, it is not looking good. I'm sorry if you're a Panthers fan. It might be a couple years before you feel happiness again watching the Panthers play. And it was great to see Dobbins out there healthy for one time because he had so much hype, so much talent, and anytime he's been on the field, he's been great. It's just, ACL, Achilles, all these injuries. And hopefully this is the year that he can stay healthy and put together a good season. So, yeah, I love this play.
So next up for Andy, a running back, Najee Harris. Andy, what did you see last week that makes you want to pick him for this week?
Well, it definitely wasn't his yards per carry last week that I love about him, but it was the fact that he got 20 carries in a close game. No touchdown last week. Obviously, no touchdown for the entire Steelers offense last week, but I think this is going to change. against the Broncos. I mean, the Seahawks were able to run all over them. The Broncos were terrible against the run last year. It looks like that is carried over into this year. You know, I might be a little afraid of Fields maybe vulturing a goal line touchdown from him, but I think this offense probably going to score a couple times. You know, I don't imagine this to be a super high scoring game, but I don't think they're going to kick 6 field goals and get the win. I just liked how much he was used over Jaylen Warren and Cordero Patterson. I don't necessarily think that's going to continue, but I still think he is going to get the majority of the work, and this is a very plus matchup for running backs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think at the end of the season we're going to look back and say what a crazy efficient year Najee Harris has. But we're going to look back and we're going to say this dude touched the ball 200 times this year. And, you know, when it comes down to it, I think a perfect way to sum it up for our flex choices is I really don't care about matchup for my star players. I'm playing my good players every week. But for your flex, I do think projected game script, matchup, those kind of things start to matter more when you're digging into your bench. And this is a good matchup for Najee, right? The only information we have this year on the Broncos defense is that Seattle ran on them last week and their offense didn't look too great. So those two things seem to be a pretty solid line for Najee Harris to carry the ball another 15 times. And he's always going to have a chance to get in the end zone. Like Andy said, I would say more likely that Fields vultures him than Jaylen Warren to vulture him from a rushing touchdown. So my next guy is going to be a wide receiver. This one's going to be a little lower in the rankings, someone that everyone had a chance to go get for really not a crazy amount of fab this week. I got him for some pretty low bids in a couple leagues. I think in general, Tyler Johnson was going for more fab or waiver priority than Demarcus Robinson. But for me, last year, Demarcus Robinson, when he got the snap share at the end of the season, he was very productive. He was basically a solid wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 option for your team. And I think I would really just expect a very similar outcome. I think Cooper Kupp's going to get absolutely peppered. And then I think some of these other weapons are going to see their target numbers increase. And when it comes down to it, I think this could be another high-scoring game with the Cardinals, similar to what we saw with Buffalo and Arizona last week. So Demarcus Robinson's a good player. He was already in their 3 wide receiver set, so I really don't think he has too much to learn. I just think Stafford knows he can depend on him. And something very interesting from last week, even though Cooper Kupp had a monster game, him and Demarcus Robinson tied the team for the same amount of red zone targets. Now, neither one of those was some huge, crazy number, but I do think Robinson in the red zone, everyone knows Cooper Kupp's going to get the ball, so he's going to get single coverage, and he's just going to be on the field. And I think you could do a lot worse for your flex or your wide receiver 3 than a player on an efficient offense who's going to play 80-90% of the snaps.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. You know, Tyler Johnson might have had more yards last week, but that's not necessarily indicative of what this offense is going to be like going forward without Puka. I mean, Robinson has been with the team longer, and he has proven that he can be a very viable wide receiver. And I definitely expect him to be more of the wide receiver 2 in this room, Tyler Johnson. So I like this play. Love the Cardinals playing against the Cardinals because they have a great offense and their defense does not look too good. So I think this is a very plus matchup for him.
And now going to another Robinson, not brothers, but Andy, Wandale Robinson for this week. The little short, whatever you want to call him, dude. This dude's quick.
He's very quick, and this is very much for deep leagues. He's available in he's only rostered in 28% of leagues, so there's a good chance he's still out there on waivers. You know, there's a lot of guys I like playing more than him. You know, obviously Jordan Mason, all the guys that we've already said, Jameson Williams, Chris Godwin, some of the guys that we were talking about flexing last week. I would play them over Wandale Robinson, but if you need a guy, he might be able to save you. He had 12 targets last week, which is tied with Tyreek Hill for second in the NFL, just behind Cooper Kupp's absurd 21. You know, only 6 catches and 44 yards to show for it, and just an absolutely demolishing by the Vikings of the Giants. But this week they get to play the Commanders, who allowed the most fantasy points to wide receivers last year, and this year they are on pace to absolutely smash that, getting absolutely cooked by the Buccaneers. I don't think this passing attack is nearly as good as the one the Bucs had, but I still think that this could be a bounce back game for the Giants. This is a defense that you can attack through the air. And, you know, if you watch the Giants-Vikings game, it was absolutely gross. The Giants look terrible, but I don't think that's indicative of how they're going to be all season. There are going to be spike weeks from guys. And with this matchup, I think this is a guy that you can definitely play this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate matchup play. The top 3 Bucs wide receivers all scored a receiving touchdown last week. Godwin, Evans, McMillan all scored through the air. So like Andy said, I mean, if you're scrolling down on your waivers because everyone's taken, or you're really having to dig a little deeper, which we have all been there, I think you could do a lot worse than Wandale Robinson. My last and least exciting flex play of the week, Zeke Elliott. Didn't light the world on fire last week at all. 10 carries, a catch, but he did get the touchdown, and I would expect him to kind of just slot into that role for the Cowboys. I mean, they trust him the most in pass protection. He's the goal line back. He's not exciting, but I do think Zeke looks just at least like he looked last year, which I was slightly impressed with. He looked a little younger last year, and I think I'm just okay playing Zeke if you're trying to get someone out there who's going to get the snaps, have a chance to score. Think 75% Najee Harris, right? Like, you're trying to get a guy has a chance for a touchdown. It's not super exciting, but this Dallas offense is going to score a lot of points. And this game, I think, could maybe get a little high scoring based on what the Saints did last week on offense. So we'll see. I mean, Zeke Elliott, Andy, how do you feel about it?
No, I think that's a great play. I threw him into my flex in the league last week and was very happy. You know, like you said, this Cowboys offense is good, and it seems like Zeke is going to be more of the goal line guy for this team and still get work, you know, in between the 20s as well. It might be more of a split there, and then him closer to the goal line, which is, you know, ideal for fantasy. You know, touchdowns are worth so much more than just regular yardage. So, yeah, I think, you know, I don't see a world where the Saints are blowing the Cowboys out and they've got to pass a lot. I think it's either going to be a close game where both teams need to score points and it's going back and forth, or one where maybe the Cowboys get ahead and they just keep running the ball with Zeke and Rico Dowdle.
So now we're going to move on to our streaming portion of the show. But before we do that, we're going to check in on how we did last week. So anyone watched our show last week, we want to just update you guys and just in general, just have some accountability for like, hey, how are we doing on our picks just throughout the season? So it's like, are these guys actually doing well? Should I even be listening to them? So to bring it up for last week, starting with Andy's plays, obviously JSN and Spears didn't have the best week, but Jaden Reed, Baker Mayfield, absolutely monster weeks. No one picked a good tight end last week, so we're not even counting those in the hit rate. If you played Isaiah Likely before our show even came out, hats off to you. Over on my side, Jerome Ford, Chris Godwin, Matthew Stafford, all good weeks. Obviously, Chuba Hubbard had a terrible week. But go ahead, pause the video, take a peek at these if you want to look and kind of look into some of our picks so far. We only have 1 week of statistics for you, but as the season goes, I think it's going to be a little more telling on if we're making good calls in general. But now moving into the streamers, looks like we're going back to this Washington game with Danny Dimes for Andy. QB streamer Danny Dimes, he's going to be on the waiver wire. There's no problem picking him up.
Oh, yeah. And before I start, you know, talking about how much I obviously love Daniel Jones, I would say if Baker's there, I would still play him again. I love his matchup again this week, but you need a guy you can pick up because Baker might have been picked up in a lot of leagues. Daniel Jones would be the guy. So this feels really gross, but it's the same reason I like, you know, Wandale Robinson and love Malik Neighbors this week. Just take your garbage, put a little Febreze on it, brush off the crumbs, the dirt, whatever, and put it in your lineup. If you thought he had a bad week last year, week 1, Danny Dimes had an even worse fantasy performance, threw for less yards, same amount of interceptions, looked absolutely horrendous, and then came out week 2 and was the QB1 overall. So it is possible, especially this early in the season, for, you know, teams to have a bad week 1 and still bounce back. Don't think the Giants are going to be good this year by any means, but I think if there's any matchup where he can score points, it would be this one. He's always a threat with his legs. so he can get some rushing yards for you. I think some of these receivers will be able to get theirs in this game. It feels so gross. Just put him on your roster, put him in your lineup, and close your eyes and just open them. I don't know, maybe after the game's over, maybe halfway through the game. You know, you're not going to want to watch Daniel Jones going in your lineup, but I think that he's actually going to have a good week this week.
Probably don't even want to watch the game either, to be honest. If you're playing him, he seems to me like one of those guys that by not watching him, he will do better than if you watch the game. Just to reiterate what Andy said, if you happen to follow our advice last week, picked up Stafford or Baker, ride with those guys again. But Danny Dimes has a special place in my heart, man. He won me a championship 2 years ago, dropped 30-plus back-to-back weeks. I still get crap for liking Danny Dimes, but, you know, I'll always have that championship from Danny. So moving on to my streamer of the week, I'm going to go Justin Fields. Kind of things Andy mentioned earlier. I like his potential to score some points on the ground, whether that's just through yardage or potentially scoring a touchdown. I think this Steelers game is going to be close. I think it's going to have good game script that the Steelers, where I think they're going to win the game, I don't think they're going to be blowing out the team where they're just going to shut down the offense and try to run the clock out. So with Fields, I mean, he didn't look great, but he still is that same Justin Fields that has this rushing upside that we were chasing the past couple of years. I think when it comes to the passing game, Pickens looked great. I think their offense in general looked fine. So I think you could do a lot worse than a guy who could get you 5, 6, 7 free points on the ground, in addition to maybe scoring a touchdown or so. I mean, they didn't even score a touchdown last week, and I don't think you would have been super depressed with Justin Fields' outcome. So same as kind of Danny Dimes here. If you're looking for someone a little deeper who's on the waiver wire, these are two guys with a little rushing upside in games that we don't mind targeting. So running on to Andy's tight end of the week, Colby Parkinson, going back to the Rams game. Andy, why Colby Parkinson?
Let's see. Well, I mean, the big thing is I love this matchup against the Cardinals. I think they're going to be throwing the ball quite a bit. You know, I'm not in love with Colby Parkinson. If you have other tight end options, you know, I wouldn't bench any of the stars who underperformed week one. I would not bench them to start Parkinson. Maybe you had Njoku. You missed out on getting Likely. You got to put a guy in there. I think you could do a lot worse. He had 5 targets last week. Obviously, with Puka being out, there is a vacuum of volume that's going to have to be filled by somebody. So, you know, I think he'll get at least enough targets where he has a chance to score points. And when you're streaming tight end, that's about all you can ask for.
Yeah, I mean, he was involved in the offense. We all watched the Sunday night game. I mean, he caught some balls. And I think in general for a tight end, I'm cool taking, you know, 4 or 5 targets and a chance at a touchdown. That's what you're looking for from a streaming tight end. I mean, basically, when it comes to streaming tight ends, and I think Juwan Johnson, my streaming tight end of the week choices, you're just picking someone who might score. We don't think any of these tight ends are getting 9 catches for 80 yards. We're picking guys who are going to be on the field and are going to be red zone threats. Johnson scored last week. I think the Saints are going to have to throw this ball against Dallas as well. And so when it comes down to it, Juwan Johnson, he's going to be a red zone target for that team. He's one of the bigger bodied guys, and maybe he gets in the end zone. In the past couple of years, Johnson has had a couple stretches where he gets these games 2, 3 in a row where he'll score a touchdown. I'm just going to bet on that streak if I'm looking at the waiver wire. Like Andy said, if you drafted any of these top 10, 12 guys, I'm just going back to them. I'm not really too concerned about week one. We didn't really learn too much in the tight end market coming off week one. But if you're looking for a deeper guy, Juwan Johnson, Colby Parkinson, I think they're great options. So
Juwan Johnson was the tight end 2 during the fantasy playoffs last year. But also is be careful with this New Orleans roulette of tight ends. I know Taysom Hill was my guy last week. Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, both top 5 guys. So
if you could play tight end rooms, I think the Saints would be maybe the number 1 pick. They got 3 that have a chance to score on any given week here. But thank you guys for tuning in. Flex Friday, week 2. We're going to track our picks, track them with us. Let's hope we have a better hit rate than last week. But I think in general, Andy and I are both pretty happy. I mean, if you had tailed either one of us, you could have had some monster plays. Jaden Reed, Baker Mayfield, Chris Godwin. And when it comes down to it, we're picking lower guys. We're not picking smash starts here, because if you guys are watching, you're already starting those players. So, Andy, thanks for joining us. Go Pack, go Malik Willis, just so Andy joins us again on the show and he doesn't get super sad.
Oof.
To next week. But thank you guys. Check out the other videos on the channel, and we will see you next week.